One final question.
One quick final question.
Yeah. Do you really believe that President Trump thinks he lost that election?
Yes. Our investigation following the facts and the law determined that...
No way. Thank you. That's enough.
I have a unanimous consent
Gentleman
request.
from New York is recognized for unanimous consent.
Actually, I have two. One is to article entitled, "With AG Bondi next to him, Trump says deranged Jack Smith must be investigated." And the other is a tweet from Marco Rubio. "There is nothing patriotic about what is occurring on Capitol Hill. This is third world style anti-American anarchy."
Without objection. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Can I get an extra 33 seconds?
You get your full 5 minutes.
Well, okay, fine. It's curious because you've sat here all day, and thank you so much for showing up, because this was something that you wanted to do. The Republicans wanted to make sure that you were hid in a room with no cameras, because I was there. They didn't really want you out public because they were afraid of what you would say, which is that you could have proven your case because you are a career prosecutor.
What Jasmine Crockett did to Jim Jordan on the House floor was not just a political moment. It was a reality check that Republicans desperately did not want on camera.
Who knows how to prosecute criminals? So just to be clear, today it seems like the Republicans have not really fought very much about whether or not Trump was guilty or not. In fact, their fight seems to be over whether or not you were authorized to prove their guilt. Do you recall a number of Republican members asking about whether or not your appointment was okay, even though we know that you've testified about the more than 100-year precedent that allowed for your appointment?
I was asked questions about that today, and our position, as we filed in our appeal, is that there was strong support for my appointment, including Supreme Court precedent directly on point.
Thank you so much. Additionally, everybody's been all gingerly here today, but I don't know why we're acting surprised that a man who had close to 90 allegations out of 4 different jurisdictions and ultimately ended up with 34 convictions after a jury was able to hear all the evidence would possibly be committing a criminal act on January 6th. In fact, considering the fact that we are now under the impression that he is violating people's due process rights, he is ignoring court orders, he's starting wars without congressional authority in contradiction to the Constitution. He's enriching himself to the tune of over $1.4 billion. He's shaking down electeds to draw maps that will help him stay in power because the Republicans don't understand that they swore an oath to the Constitution and that we are supposed to do checks and balances. He's also shaking down TV stations to get money. So why are we trying to pretend as if it is out of the realm for this particular man to commit the crime that he committed on January 6th? And frankly, the only reason he ran for president was to make sure that he would not be prosecuted, because I fully believe that you would have put him under the jail based on our long form conversation that we had. But according to your special counsel report on page 137, it states the department's view that the Constitution prohibits the continued indictment and prosecution of a president is categorical and does not turn on the gravity of the crimes charged, the strength of the government's proof, or the merits of the prosecution. And that, quote, but for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. In other words, Donald Trump ran for president, like I said, so he wouldn't have to spend the rest of his life in prison. The chairman and other members of this committee have spent all day attacking you and trying to rewrite the history of January 6th. But Mr. Jim Jordan, the chairman, failed to mention how he was running around the Capitol terrified by the possibility that all those insurrectionists would harm him. In fact, on page 97 of the deposition transcript, you mentioned how Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, quote unquote, never saw Jim Jordan so scared. The chairman also failed to mention that he was in direct contact with the White House in the days leading up to and on January 6th, which is why his toll records were subpoenaed by your office. Let me be clear, because they're trying to act like this is Democrats on Republicans, and I guess you are a covert Democrat that knew that he was going to try to steal an election before he tried to steal that election, and so therefore you were somehow put into place. I mean, the conspiracy theories make your head spin, but nevertheless, were you going to subpoena the toll records of every single Republican simply because they were a Republican?
No, we subpoenaed the toll records in the course of this investigation because they were relevant to our investigation.
Relevant. Oh, okay. All right. So that means something about facts. So let's talk about facts. Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden, yes or no?
That's correct.
Okay. In fact, 60 federal and state courts have found that there was no evidence of election fraud. Trump's own attorney general and vice president knew that he lost the election, but he still tried to steal the election by pressuring state officials, designing fake elector plans, nearly having Mike Pence hanged, and ultimately demanding that his supporters, quote, fight like hell, correct?
Correct.
We all saw it happen we all saw what happened once they reached the U.S. Capitol. As your report outlines, President Trump knew that he would incite violence at the Capitol that day. In fact, some of Trump's senior advisors were pushing for violence. For example, page 81 of the report details how co-conspirators number 2, John Eastman, tried to convince Mike Pence to break the law, stating that, quote, violence was necessary. So it isn't just Trump who was responsible for the death of multiple law enforcement officers and the injuries of thousands of people. A lot of Republican members of Congress are also responsible. 147 Republicans voted to overturn the 2020 election results, including multiple members currently serving on this committee. And I will yield.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, we've heard a lot of information that's gone across this day as we spin it here. We've heard disregard for the First Amendment at times. We've heard talk about solely seeking charges against Donald Trump, obviously targeting. We've talked about the amount of time and reasonable time frame.
The exchange starts with what Republicans always pretend is an innocent question. Do you really believe Donald Trump thought he lost the election? And before the witness can even finish explaining how the investigation followed the facts and the law, Jim Jordan shuts it down. No way. That's enough. That alone tells you everything. If the facts mattered, they let him speak. If the law mattered, they wouldn't panic. And if the truth helped them, they wouldn't be racing to silence it. Then Jasmine Crockett steps in, and notice what she does first. She flips the script. She reminds everyone that Republicans didn't want this witness out in public. They wanted him hidden. No cameras, no sunlight, because he's a career prosecutor who actually knows how criminal cases work, and that terrifies them. And Crockett makes a devastating observation. Republicans haven't spent the day arguing that Trump is innocent. Not really. Their entire strategy has been to argue process, not truth. Was he authorized? Was the appointment valid? Was the paperwork perfect? Because they know arguing the facts would be a losing battle. Then Crockett goes straight for the jugular. She lays out what Republicans keep pretending is unthinkable. That a man facing nearly 90 allegations across 4 jurisdictions, who ended up convicted on 34 counts after a jury heard the evidence, might also commit crimes related to January 6. And she doesn't stop there. She lists the pattern: violating due process, ignoring court orders, starting wars without congressional authority, enriching himself to the tune of over $1.4 billion, shaking down elected officials to rig district maps, pressuring media outlets for payouts. And she asks the question Republicans refuse to answer. Why is it so unbelievable that this man committed the crime of trying to overthrow an election? Then comes the part they really didn't want aired. Crockett reads directly from the special counsel's report, page 137, where it states clearly that, but for Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. That's not opinion. That's not spin. That's the Department of Justice saying the only reason Donald Trump isn't on trial right now is because he ran for president to avoid prison. And Crockett says it out loud. Then she turns the spotlight onto Jim Jordan himself. She points out what he left out, how terrified he was on January 6, how Mark Meadows said he'd never seen Jim Jordan that scared, how Jordan was in direct contact with the White House before and during the attack. That's why his phone records were subpoenaed. And when Republicans try to turn that into a persecution narrative, Crockett shuts it down cold. No, subpoenas weren't issued because someone was Republican. They were issued because the information was relevant. Facts, evidence, relevance. Everything Jim Jordan pretends to care about until it applies to him. And then Crockett does what Republicans hate most. She states reality plainly. Donald Trump lost the election. 60 courts found no fraud. Trump's own attorney general knew it. His own vice president knew it. Yet he still pressured state officials, still pushed fake elector schemes, still incited a mob to fight like hell, still knew violence was coming and did nothing. And according to the report, senior advisors openly said violence was necessary. This wasn't chaos. This was a plan. What Crockett did here wasn't partisan theater, it was historical clarity. For years, Republicans have tried to reduce January 6 to bad vibes, tourists, or heated rhetoric. They've tried to blur the timeline, muddy the facts, and drown the truth in procedure and outrage. Crockett cut through all of it. She reminded everyone that accountability doesn't disappear just because you're powerful. That evidence doesn't stop mattering just because it's inconvenient. And that shouting, witch hunt, doesn't erase sworn testimony, phone records, court rulings, or documented conspiracies. And perhaps most importantly, she exposed the real reason this hearing exists at all, not to uncover the truth, but to rewrite it. Jim Jordan wasn't chairing that committee to learn what happened on January 6. He was there to protect himself, protect Trump, and protect a narrative that's collapsing under its own weight. That's why he interrupts. That's why he deflects. That's why facts make him uncomfortable. Because the more sunlight hits January 6, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't a moment of confusion. It was an attempted power grab that failed. And Jasmine Crockett made sure the record reflects that. So if you're wondering why Republicans seem angrier every time the facts come up, it's because facts don't lie, and they don't forget. If you made it this far, drop a comment with your thoughts, hit like if you appreciate accountability over spin, and subscribe for more breakdowns like this. Because the truth doesn't defend itself, and clearly, some people are counting on you not paying attention.